The tension between Liam, Steffi, and Hope had been building quietly for weeks, like a storm gathering strength beyond the horizon. It began not with a dramatic confrontation but with something far more painful: distance. The cold kind of distance that grows between people who once believed they understood each other completely. Liam stood in the living room that evening watching Steffi move through the house with a controlled calm that felt colder than anger. Her eyes avoided his, her voice clipped and restrained whenever she spoke. Every word she offered sounded like it had been carefully measured, stripped of warmth and stripped of the emotional intimacy they once shared. To Liam, the silence between them felt heavier than any argument they could have had. He had tried to explain himself earlier that day, tried to describe the complicated emotions he was struggling with as Hope and Thomas continued working closely together at Forrester Creations. But Steffi had listened with a distant expression, as though she had already made up her mind long before he finished speaking. She had heard enough excuses in her life. The conversation had ended not with a resolution but with a wall. Steffi's disappointment lingered in the room like a shadow that refused to fade. Liam felt it in every glance she refused to give him. For years their relationship had survived countless misunderstandings, betrayals, and complicated loyalties. Yet now something felt different. This time the distance between them seemed deeper, more final. And what hurt Liam even more was the realization that when he tried to turn to Hope for understanding, she seemed just as unreachable. Hope had spent the afternoon defending Thomas with an intensity that Liam could barely comprehend. She insisted Thomas had changed, that he deserved another chance to prove himself, that the past should no longer define who he was. But to Liam, those words felt like another betrayal layered on top of the tension already suffocating him. Standing there between two women who had once defined his entire emotional world, Liam felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping into his chest. It was not simply sadness. It was something colder, something emptier, the sense that he no longer belonged anywhere among the people who once mattered most to him. Steffi had turned away from him with quiet disappointment. Hope seemed blinded by her loyalty to Thomas. And Liam, caught in the middle of these shifting loyalties, felt like an outsider in his own life. That feeling followed him long after he left the house and stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights flickered around him as he walked without a clear destination, trying to quiet the restless storm inside his thoughts. Eventually he found himself outside a small bar tucked between two older buildings on a quiet street. The warm glow spilling from the windows promised something simple: temporary escape. Liam stepped inside without hesitation. The air inside the bar carried the familiar scent of alcohol and quiet conversations. A few patrons sat scattered around the room, their voices low beneath the soft music playing overhead. Liam took a seat at the bar and ordered a drink. Then another, and another. The warmth of the alcohol spread through his chest, dulling the sharp edges of the thoughts that had been tormenting him all evening. But alcohol rarely erases memories. It simply makes them louder. With every drink, Liam's mind replayed the moments that had driven him here. Steffi's cold expression, Hope's passionate defense of Thomas, the feeling of being dismissed by the two people whose opinions mattered most to him. Each memory struck him like a quiet echo of rejection. Liam had spent years believing he was the emotional center between Steffi and Hope, the man both women loved and fought over. Now he wondered if that belief had always been an illusion. The bartender placed another glass in front of him, but Liam barely noticed. His thoughts drifted deeper into the past, remembering arguments that had never truly healed and wounds that had only been buried beneath temporary reconciliations. He had always believed that love could overcome the chaos surrounding their lives. Tonight that belief felt painfully naive. That was when Ivy appeared. She stepped into the bar quietly, the dim lighting casting soft shadows across her face as she scanned the room. When her eyes landed on Liam sitting alone at the counter, a faint smile touched her lips. She approached slowly, her movements calm and deliberate, before taking the empty seat beside him. Liam glanced up with a faint look of surprise that quickly softened into recognition. Ivy greeted him with warmth that immediately contrasted with the emotional coldness he had experienced earlier that evening. Her voice carried a softness that felt almost soothing after the tension he had endured all day. She asked what had happened, and Liam, already weakened by alcohol and exhaustion, began to talk. The words spilled out more easily than he expected. He told her about the arguments with Steffi, about Hope's relentless defense of Thomas, about the growing feeling that he no longer mattered to either of them. Ivy listened carefully, occasionally offering quiet reassurances that made Liam feel understood in a way he hadn't felt in weeks. But beneath her calm expression, something else stirred quietly inside her. Ivy had her own history with Steffi and Hope, a history filled with disappointments, resentments, and unresolved bitterness. Hearing Liam describe the pain those two women had caused him reignited emotions she had buried long ago. In that moment she saw an opportunity hidden within his vulnerability. The conversation continued late into the night. Liam drank more than he intended. Ivy leaned closer as she spoke, her tone soft and sympathetic. The distance between them slowly disappeared beneath the haze of alcohol and shared grievances. Liam felt the warmth of her presence filling the emotional void that had been growing inside him all evening. Eventually Ivy suggested they leave the bar and continue talking somewhere quieter. Liam barely hesitated before agreeing. They walked through the cool night air together, their conversation drifting between painful memories and quiet confessions. By the time they reached Ivy's apartment, Liam's thoughts had become blurred by exhaustion and alcohol. What happened next unfolded not with clear intention but with the reckless momentum of two people caught in the same storm of loneliness. That night they crossed a line neither of them could take back. Morning arrived with harsh clarity. Sunlight filtered through the curtains of Ivy's apartment, illuminating the room with a pale glow that felt painfully unforgiving. Liam remained asleep, the exhaustion of the previous night still heavy in his body. Ivy, however, had been awake for hours. She stood near the window watching the quiet street below, her thoughts racing through the possibilities of what she had set in motion. Slowly she turned back toward the bed where Liam lay sleeping. The memory of the previous night stirred a mixture of satisfaction and calculation in her mind. She picked up her phone. Carefully, quietly, Ivy began taking photographs. Images that captured Liam in a compromising state. Photographs that would tell a scandalous story if they ever reached the public eye. Each click of the camera carried the quiet promise of revenge she had been waiting for. Because Ivy had no intention of keeping this secret. Later that week the city woke to a scandal that spread like wildfire. Tabloid newspapers appeared across every newsstand with explosive headlines splashed across the front pages. The photographs were unmistakable. Liam Spencer, heir to the powerful Spencer publishing empire, exposed in a shocking late-night affair with Ivy. The reaction was immediate. Hope and Steffi both discovered the news within hours of its release. The shock that struck them was nearly identical. Both women stared at the images in stunned silence before anger surged through them with overwhelming force. For Hope, the betrayal felt deeply personal. Liam had always claimed to be a man guided by loyalty and moral conviction. Seeing him exposed in such a reckless scandal shattered the image she had believed in for so long. Steffi's reaction was even more explosive. She felt humiliated by the public spectacle of it all. The man who had once sworn his love to her had now become the center of a scandal splashed across every headline in the city. To Steffi, the betrayal felt unforgivable. The fallout did not stop there. Bill Spencer summoned Liam to his office the moment the news reached him. The confrontation between father and son was brutal. Bill's disappointment burned through every word he spoke. He warned Liam that actions like this did not simply damage personal relationships. They destroyed reputations, businesses, and the credibility of the Spencer name itself. Meanwhile, the scandal rippled outward toward Forrester Creations. The company found itself pulled into the chaos as media outlets connected the story to the ongoing tensions between the Spencer and Forrester families. Executives called emergency meetings, desperately trying to contain the damage to the company's public image. Amid the growing storm of outrage and media frenzy, Ivy sat quietly in her apartment watching the news coverage unfold across television screens and social media feeds. A slow smile spread across her face. The plan she had imagined for so long had finally come to life. Steffi and Hope had both been humiliated. Liam had become the center of public scandal. For a moment Ivy allowed herself to savor the victory she believed she had achieved. But just as the satisfaction began to settle in her chest, her phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. Ivy hesitated before answering. The voice on the other end spoke only a few quiet words. Yet those words were enough to wipe the smile from her face. Because whoever was calling knew exactly what she had done. And the revenge Ivy believed she had controlled so carefully was suddenly spiraling into something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The voice on the other end of the phone did not shout, did not threaten, and did not even introduce itself. That calmness was what made it far more unsettling. Ivy stood in the center of her living room with the phone pressed tightly against her ear. The television in the background still replaying the scandal that had exploded across the city only hours earlier. Liam's name was being repeated endlessly across the screen, surrounded by speculation, accusations, and commentary that seemed to grow more vicious with every passing minute. Yet the words spoken through the phone cut deeper than anything the media could say. The caller spoke with unsettling certainty, describing details of the photographs Ivy had taken while Liam slept. describing the moment she sent the files to a contact connected to a tabloid journalist, and even referencing the quiet smile that had crossed her face when the first headlines appeared online. The voice knew far too much. For the first time since launching her carefully crafted revenge, Ivy felt a chill run through her spine. She tried to maintain control of her tone, demanding to know who was calling and how they had obtained such information. But the caller ignored the question entirely. Instead, the voice delivered a final message before the line went silent. Ivy was warned that revenge often has consequences that cannot be controlled. The caller told her she had started something far larger than she understood, and that if she thought humiliating Liam, Steffi, and Hope would bring her satisfaction, she had badly underestimated how quickly the situation could spiral beyond her control. The call ended without explanation, leaving Ivy standing motionless in the quiet apartment. For several seconds she stared at the phone in her hand as if expecting it to ring again. But the room remained silent except for the steady voice of the television anchor continuing to dissect the scandal that now dominated every media outlet in the city. Slowly Ivy lowered the phone and turned back toward the screen. At first she tried to dismiss the call as a bluff. Perhaps someone from the tabloid had decided to play games with her, hoping to intimidate her or extract more information. That seemed like the most reasonable explanation. After all, she had been extremely careful. She had used anonymous channels when sending the photographs. She had taken every precaution to ensure the story would explode without revealing her involvement. No one should have known it was her. Yet the confidence in the caller's voice made that explanation feel less convincing the longer she thought about it. Whoever had contacted her had spoken as though they were observing everything from the beginning. It was not a guess. It was knowledge. Across the city, the chaos unleashed by the scandal continued to spread. Liam sat alone in his apartment staring at the newspaper lying open across the table. The photographs felt like a cruel distortion of reality, frozen fragments of a moment he barely remembered. His head still ached from the alcohol and the overwhelming confrontation with Bill earlier that morning. Every time he looked at the images printed across the front page he felt a wave of shame crash over him again. The reality of what he had done, or at least what the world believed he had done, felt impossible to escape. He knew that the night at Ivy's apartment had been a mistake born from loneliness and confusion. But the scandal surrounding it had transformed that mistake into something much larger. It was no longer just a private lapse in judgment. It had become a public humiliation splashed across headlines and television broadcasts. What haunted Liam the most was not the damage to his reputation. It was the thought of how Steffi and Hope must have felt when they saw those images. He had spent years caught between the two women, promising each of them loyalty and honesty. Now both of them had proof that he had failed them in the most reckless way imaginable. Meanwhile, at the Forrester estate, Steffi paced the living room with the newspaper crumpled in her hand. Her anger had not cooled since the moment she first saw the photographs. To her, the scandal represented more than Liam's personal mistake. It represented the final confirmation that he had never truly learned from the chaos he had caused. Throughout their lives, she had defended him in the past, stood beside him through countless emotional storms. But this time the humiliation felt too public, too damaging, and too exhausting to forgive. Hope's reaction was quieter but no less intense. When she first saw the headlines, the shock left her almost numb. For a long time she simply stared at the images, trying to reconcile the man she believed Liam to be with the man the world now saw. What hurt her most was not the betrayal itself, but the realization that Liam had turned to Ivy in a moment when he could have chosen honesty. Instead of confronting the tension between them, he had run away from it. Across the corporate floors of Forrester Creations, the atmosphere had become tense and chaotic. The executive boardroom was filled with anxious voices as company leaders struggled to assess the damage caused by the scandal. Although Liam was not a Forrester executive, the connections between the Spencer and Forrester families meant the scandal inevitably spilled into their corporate image. Reporters were already speculating about the personal rivalries between Steffi, Hope, and Ivy, turning the situation into a sensational narrative that threatened to damage the brand's carefully cultivated reputation. The company's leadership knew they had to act quickly. Crisis management teams began preparing statements designed to distance the fashion house from the scandal. Marketing directors reviewed upcoming campaigns to determine whether any adjustments were necessary. Every decision felt urgent, because in the world of high-profile fashion and media, reputation could collapse overnight. Amid all of this turmoil, Ivy remained the only person who appeared outwardly calm. She continued watching the news coverage with a quiet smile that suggested she was satisfied with the outcome. On the surface, her plan had succeeded perfectly. The scandal had humiliated the very people she blamed for years of emotional pain. Yet the memory of the phone call lingered in her mind like a shadow. As the evening approached, Ivy finally turned off the television and sat down on the couch. For the first time since the story broke, she allowed herself to think beyond the immediate satisfaction of revenge. She began asking questions she had not considered before. Who had access to the information about the photographs before they were released? Who could have traced the anonymous communication channels she used? And most importantly, why would someone choose to warn her rather than expose her immediately? Those questions led her to a disturbing realization. If someone knew the truth and had chosen not to reveal it yet, that meant they were waiting. Waiting for the right moment to use that information. Waiting until the scandal had reached its peak before introducing a new twist that could change everything. The thought made Ivy's stomach tighten with unease. She stood and walked slowly toward the window, staring out at the city lights stretching across the horizon. Somewhere out there was a person who knew exactly what she had done. Someone who understood the role she had played in creating the scandal that now consumed the entire city. And that person had decided to remain silent, for now. What Ivy could not yet see was that the mystery caller was not acting alone. In a quiet office several miles away, a figure sat behind a desk illuminated by the glow of multiple computer screens. On those screens were copies of the same photographs that had appeared in the tabloids earlier that day, but there were also additional images Ivy had not released. Photographs taken from a surveillance camera in the hallway outside her apartment. Images showing Liam arriving late that night. Images showing Ivy guiding him inside. And images showing Ivy standing over Liam with her phone while he slept. The figure leaned back in the chair, studying the evidence with quiet patience. The scandal gripping the city was only the first act of a much larger story. And soon the truth about who had really orchestrated it would begin to emerge in ways no one, not Liam, not Steffi, not Hope, and certainly not Ivy, was prepared to.